B.F.Skinner, professor of psychology at Harvard University, has authored such important scientific books as The Behavior of Organisms, Science and Human Behavior, Verbal Behavior, Cumulative Record, The Technology of Teaching, and Contingencies of Reinforcement. In addition, he has written 2 books of general interest, which have been both widely received and highly controversial: the novel Walden II and Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Included in the many scientific awards bestowed upon him are the Distinguished Scientific Award of the American Psychological Association, membership in the National Academy of Sciences, and the President's Medal of Science. In this film, Dr. Skynner addresses himself to some of the most important questions facing the counseling profession. A decade ago, Dr. Skynner indicated that he did not believe the fields of counseling and psychotherapy were ready to use his techniques. We joined Dr. Skynner and Dr. John M. Whiteley of Washington University as they are discussing how Dr. Skynner would assess developments in the past decade.
Now, I feel that a great deal has been done, first of all, for the management of institutionalized psychotics, retardates, but much more is being done in face-to-face counseling, and rather along the lines that I would like to see developed further. I think an understanding of the importance of the consequences of behavior is now much farther advanced than I would have guessed in the time which has elapsed, and the realization that much more is to be gained by looking at the environment of a person rather than at his feelings and his states of mind and things of that kind.
What are the deficiencies with analyzing the feelings or states of mind? How do you translate somebody's problems who come in that way into a system that you can use to help them with what they see as feeling problems?
Well, the complaint is very real, of course. People suffer from pain, they suffer from anxiety, they suffer from fears. These are feelings. That's the thing that is most important to the individual. Actually, unless these interfere with his behavior, we'll usually allow him to go on suffering. But if he can't keep a job because of this, or he can't exist as a father or a husband or something of that kind because of these feelings, then people urge him to get help. And he comes to the counselor with a very real problem, and it has the form of a feeling. But what the counselor is to do is not to change the feeling as such, but to change what is felt, and that is the condition of the individual, his behavior in the world in which he must exist. It's a good deal like the problem of a person with a toothache. When you go to the dentist with a toothache, you're going because of a feeling. But the dentist doesn't work on the feeling, he works on the tooth.
Why can't you help somebody by focusing on their feelings?
Well, you can learn a great deal about asking a person about his feelings, but it can lead you to overlook other things about him. He is much more aware of his feelings than he is of what happened to him 5 days ago or something, which is explaining this feeling, you see. He's forgotten that happened. He can tell you about the feeling. You've got to guess about his history, but if you can get him to talk about what has happened, you get away from the feelings to the things which have produced the condition which is felt. And I think if you take feelings to be the essential subject matter of counseling or therapy, you're likely to overlook the real world. And you try to interpret feelings and try to argue that one feeling leads to another, that feelings of frustration lead to feelings of aggression. Before you know it, you're working in a psychic world of some kind in which there's no contact with reality whatsoever. And that, I think, is misleading. It diverts attention away from the kinds of things which would be much more usefully identified and changed.
Well, what do you do to change behavior if feelings aren't the key to changing behavior? What does change behavior?
What changes behavior is the environment a change in the environment. If the environment stays the way it is now, then the bodily conditions will stay as they are, and the feelings of those conditions will remain unchanged. But if someone, for example, is feeling depressed, now this might be a physiological thing which could be changed with a drug or something of that kind, but it might very well also be due to a shortage of reinforcers. You don't do anything that pays off. Everything you try goes wrong. You try to go out the door and you bump against a jam, and you see somebody and say the wrong thing, and everything you do goes bad, and you then are in a state of inanition. You aren't doing anything. You're not interested in trying anything new, and you're sitting around wondering what's happened to yourself. Now, that can be corrected not by trying to change the feelings of depression, but to get this chap to do something that is going to be reinforcing and build up the kinds of behavior which will give him the achievement which is then felt as a sense of achievement, which will offset the sense of discouragement or depression.
By environment, you're not confining yourself simply to the physical aspects of life, are you?
No, I'm thinking of the social environment, but I would make a distinction between those social environments which are specifically designed for instructional purposes or intentional control, how to get along with people, how to have enjoyable exchanges with people, and so on. This is just as important as how to tie your shoelaces, and that may need to be taught, and you may need to correct mistakes which are being made. In dealing with that environment, I would take the social environment as part of the natural, the real world, outside the therapeutic situation, the counseling situation, or outside the educational situation.
How do you use the consequences of someone's behavior to help shape it and change it in a counseling situation?
Well, you do this when, for example, you suggest a change in job. You may come to the conclusion of what you've talked to this man about, that he's in the wrong job. That is, he hasn't got the talents for this. It isn't paying off. It's not reinforcing him. So you may give him some tests or something, get a lead on this, and you suggest that he try a different line of work. Now, what you are doing there is proposing a change in the world in which he's living, which will, you hope, you predict, reinforce him more often than the world he's been living in. So you're proposing that he move into a world in which behaviors in his competence, in his range, will be reinforced. And you are predicting that the shortage of reinforcement is the trouble, and abundance of reinforcers will solve the problem.
You seem to really be arguing for the counselor's role as that of environmental engineer, in a sense,
yes, I think
helping
so.
the client change the circumstances under which he lives.
Yes.
And by changing the circumstances under which he lives, the social and physical circumstances, you help him change his behavior.
Right. Well, almost every situation lends itself to this kind of thing. Suppose, for example, that a person comes to you, someone that he loves has died, and he's suffering from sorrow, grief. He goes home at night, and there is where his wife was or his child was. The child's toys are still around, and so on. And you say, well, look, get rid of that situation. That situation is what is evoking all of these responses, which are no longer feasible. There's no one there to talk to. There's no one there to call by name. There's no one there to embrace, and so on. So move to a different house or move to a different city. Get away from the setting which is causing trouble. That is environmental engineering. It's simply getting rid of what appears to be a troublesome environment and arranging instead one which does not have those undesirable effects.
You're saying that the counselor's contribution to the client is ultimately in helping him rearrange the contingencies of reinforcement in his life, and that the counselor as environmental engineer is the essential change agent. On the other hand, aren't there intermediate problems in helping the client get into this different kind of environment, where the relationship with the counselor is very important,
Yes. Oh, well, the counselor, like the teacher, has got to arrange contingencies which will get the behaviors going which are going to be effective elsewhere. Merely to get a client to behave with a good personal relation, in a good personal relation with you as the counselor, that's not going to get him very far, because you are a prosthetic environment. This is an expression that a student of mine, Ogden Lindsley, uses. You are building a special world. It's a fairly easy world because you've got a person who is not yet able to deal with the rugged side of the environment, so you are making it easy temporarily. You don't want to prepare him simply for an easy world, but temporarily at least. He is to say things that would shock other people. He's not to shock you. If he gets angry, you don't get angry back, and so on. You're building a small social environment temporarily to find out what is wrong and to build up behaviors which will then be more effective in environments elsewhere.
So the counselor initially does have to build in the relationship a short-term
Yes.
new environment.
Yes.
Does that help establish him then as a more powerful reinforcer and then moving to help the client change his behavior by rearranging contingencies?
Well, of course, one classical problem is that the counselor becomes too important to the client. His approval is terribly important. The transference problem in psychoanalysis and so on. And how do you break that? How do you keep the client from coming back for this warm help that he's been getting, which can be misused, of course, by the therapist, who isn't necessarily averse to having clients come back. These are terribly difficult problems, and I haven't any single solution. Again, I have to look at every case and see what can be done in that particular case. But the whole counseling situation is designed because of problems which are presumably to be cleared up, and that is the main ultimate reinforcer that's going to keep the client coming and to give the counselor some sense of achievement.
One approach to psychotherapy assumes that the individual has within himself the capacity for growth, and what the counselor does is provide the relationship which allows the counselor, which frees the client to grow himself. Is that a valid assumption?
No, I think that's a very misleading assumption. I think that if to suppose that the individual is going to find his own solution, as far as I'm concerned, simply allowing some other controlling system to take over. If the counselor is not willing to accept his share of the responsibility in arranging a new environment and leaves it up to what he calls the individual, he's living up to other environments, not to the individual, but to other environments.
Where does the responsibility lie for choosing the values that are implemented that are the consequences of a counseling relationship? One of the frequent criticisms of the behavioral method is that somehow it will imbue the counselor with power to impose a set of values on people. How can it be set up so that doesn't happen?
Well, the whole question of the values in a culture lies well beyond any field of, say, education or economics or counseling or government. They are very difficult questions because they're concerned with the future, which is not clearly predictable. And I don't believe a counselor has any private way of arriving at a good set of values. He can either take himself to be a representative of a culture which has set down in so many words what it regards as true and good, or he can pretend or claim, and perhaps even argue that and justify his own special set of values, which may differ slightly with those of the surrounding culture and seem to him better. He can turn to the client himself and say, what do you want to do? And are you sure you want to do that? All right, let's see then if we can't reach that final stage in this particular episode.
So the counselors can say to the client, in essence, my technology to help you change your behavior is a neutral one. you specify the kinds of changes as client that you want to make. My specialty is in helping you do that because I understand how the environment needs to be changed to accomplish certain sorts of new behaviors. What about, however, in a school situation where the counselor receives a client sent to him by the teacher, say, to change his behavior in the classroom, which the teacher regards as disruptive, or a young person on drugs is referred by the school to change his behavior? What are the value questions then? What's the counselor's position vis-a-vis that?
Well, obviously it can't be solved then by asking the client what he wants to be, or how he wants to be, or what his problem is. It throws us right back on the culture as a whole, where I think the question always comes back. In any case, this is where the design of culture is, where the role of someone who is looking to the future of the culture and to the behaviors that are going to be important for that culture comes in. I don't have any simple answer to it at all. That if you believe that children who are running around in a disrupted classroom are somehow or other developing special kinds of freedom which are going to make them more effective and creative when they get older, then I think it's up to you to prove that. If, on the other hand, you believe that children who sit quietly when they're told to and get their work done are likely to develop useful skills, useful to themselves, to others, and to the culture, you have to prove that also. And my impression is that it has not yet been established that the kinds of freedom which are seen in the free school are developing creativity or originality in children, and I think you can demonstrate quite easily that they are using up time and energy that could go into the development of other skills and forms of knowledge.
If the counselor accepts as referrals those children who are seen as disruptive or discordant, isn't he really using his techniques to mold the child to the dominant values of the school?
He certainly is, and the people who subscribe to those values are hiring him to do that. It's very much like, let us say, a doctor who is concerned only with certain special forms of illness, and a person comes to him and he cures him so far as his specialty is concerned, but makes no particular effort to talk about the general health of this patient.
Is one answer to this dilemma to be found in the counselor as an environmental engineer using his knowledge about positive and negative reinforcement to change the environment of the school, to help shape it from an aversive situation, which is clearly what the counselor got boxed into in the previous situation, to one where, say, freedom for the client is to be found in choosing amongst positive alternatives?
Well, let's start the other way, if you don't mind. Let's just take the survival of a way of life as a particular kind of value. It's the value according to which that way of life is going to be judged, whether we like it or not. How can you plan with respect to that? In the first place, you've got to predict what this culture is going to have to survive, what kinds of catastrophes it's going to meet of physical nature, what kinds of social problems are going to arise, and so on. And that's very difficult. It would be wonderful if we had a better value, but we haven't. So we make some kind of prediction that we're going to need to produce the goods we consume, we're going to need to stop polluting the environment excessively, we're going to need to stop breeding indiscriminately, we're going to want the individual to develop all his capacities to the fullest so that he will be available to the culture to deal with problems as they arise and so on. So we've stepped down one level now to the kinds of behavior that we want to set up. We want people to be productive, but we don't want them to be productive in a slave system that makes them emotional cripples and so on. We want people to enjoy themselves, but not simply by smoking marijuana all their lives and that kind of thing. We're taking into account the contribution that they can make to the future. Now, the next question is, under what conditions will people be like that? Under what conditions will they work productively, enjoy what they're doing without crippling byproducts and so on? Under what conditions will they develop themselves, their talents, their skills, their artistic, musical ability, and that kind of thing? So that is where that's where the behavioral engineer comes in. And if you then deal with a particular individual, you have to ask, how much do I know about this man? How is he, or child, how is he satisfying these regular standards that we have set up? Is he going to be a productive person? Is he going to be able to get a job and hold it without suffering, without being aversively controlled, without tiring himself out so that he doesn't enjoy the rest of his life, and so on? I think by working back from the survival of a way of life, you can arrive at standards which are value judgments, and they may very well conflict with those which now prevail in the culture. I think the objection young people have to what they refer to as the Protestant work ethic is that under incentive conditions in America today, people work too hard. They spend too much of their time. They get too tied up. They work too long, and they're not able to live interesting and productive lives outside their jobs. And if that's the case, it is a perfectly legitimate complaint. This doesn't mean we should all just quit our jobs and walk off and do nothing. But then that's no solution to the excessive effect of contingencies, of economic contingencies.
Aren't you saying that the counselor can really help the client to be more free by learning to arrange things so that he can respond to positive reinforcers rather than reacting, as he so often does, say, within an educational setting, to aversive or punitive kinds of controls?
Well, I would agree, except when you say be more free, what I think you mean is he would feel freer. Because when you are under aversive control, when you are doing what you have to do, you do not feel free. When you're doing what you want to do, you feel free, but you want to do those things you were positively reinforced for doing. So that in a world in which positive reinforcement replaced aversive control, we would all feel free. We would be doing the things we do with a great sense of freedom, and that's I want that. I've spent my whole professional life exploring ways of getting away from aversive control and making the very best use of positive reinforcers. The whole field of operant behavior is the field of freedom in that sense. It's the field positive reinforcement. Of course, the operant behavior also covers escape and avoidance and aversive control. But the positive side, the positive reinforcers in an operant situation, are the very things which make people feel free. And I want more than that, more of that than we now have. I think it's a shame that we've gone on so long resorting to punitive and aversive techniques.
What contributions do you see counselors being able to make to the establishment of a system which really does operate on positive reinforcers?
Well, I think you have to have a very special technical skill to see the opportunity of arranging a way of life which will be primarily positive rather than negative. I think that's what you want, or what you do when you, well, for example, you suggest that this person take up a hobby. This won't work unless he gets something out of the hobby, or take up some form of art, or some type of game. If you think he can play a particular game well, tell him to specialize in that. You are asking him to do the kinds of things which you predict he will be reinforced for doing in positive ways, and this will be what we would call motivating. It will lead him to develop more of himself than he's ever developed before, and it will certainly generate a sense of freedom.
In commenting on our system, relying as it does on aversive control, you've commented that our task is not to provide for moral struggle. What did you mean?
Well, when a person has been punished for wrongdoing, we leave it up to him to find out the right thing to do. So we seem to be giving him the chance to originate his own conduct. And he may do that by struggling in the sense of experimenting with ways of life that will not be punished, with punishing himself to emphasize to himself for purposes of self-management what has happened to him in the past, and so on. What you go through in trying to find the right thing to do because you've been punished for the wrong thing is what we call moral struggle. Now, if instead of punishing wrong behavior, I make sure that right behavior is highly reinforced, then the right behavior will prevail, the wrong behavior will disappear, but not because of moral struggle. But that is rejected by a great many people in the literature of freedom because it looks like automatic goodness, that you mustn't be good simply because you just naturally tend to be good. You should be good because you've struggled to avoid being bad and have arrived at ways of being good. And that seems to me to be an unnecessary kind of thing. I'd like to have a world in which people just, because of the prevailing social contingencies, do the right thing.
Is responsibility lacking in your system? Personal responsibility?
Well, I think from a scientific point of view, no one is responsible. His genetic endowment and his past history are responsible for what he does, and that means responsible for the bad things he does and the good things he does. But we use the concept of responsibility to punish bad behavior. We hold a man responsible so that he can be justly punished, and we give a man credit for doing the things that he has done which are good, and in other words, we say he is responsible for this work of art or that scientific discovery, but there again also we should trace it back to his genetic endowment and to his earlier history. Now, I don't want to eliminate punitive contingencies if needed. I want people to be held responsible in that sense. I certainly don't mean to forego giving people credit for achievements. I want people to have a sense of that they are responsible for the good things they've done in the world. These are social techniques of management. Scientifically, there is no ultimate responsibility anywhere except at the Big Bang explosion at the beginning of the universe. But the practices which are associated with responsibility have had a place.